Hello, I'm Fred Hooper, lead visual effects artist at NVIDIA, and welcome to Intro to Niagara Part 3. In this video, we'll be building a fire asset in Niagara using some of the materials and textures from the starter content. After that, we'll hook up a simple blueprint and create a new module using Niagara script. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at this p-fire. So go to Content, Starter Content, Particles, and then open this up. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a little fire from this, and we're going to take the material for the flames, the smoke, and the ember. First thing I want to do is I want to start with the smoke, because I'll start with the smoke as my base. What I do is I want to go and find out two things. I want to look at the material, but I also want to know how the sub-UV is divided. If you go into Smoke, Required, scroll down, you can see that this is a linear blend 8x8, so it's a 64 frame texture. So that's all I need to know for that. And to look at the material, let's click this spyglass here. And this will show up in your content browser. Double click on it. And you can see here, just want to see what this material is actually doing. You can see it's got a particle color input data, so I can change the base color and the opacity. It is a translucent and it's a default lit. Let's close this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make an Aggro System. So go into Content, or wherever it is that you're saving your effects. Go into Effects, Aggro System. And normally I'd probably start from a template, but I want to walk through the whole system. So let's create an empty system. Hit Finish. Now from here, let's name this effects_fire. So let's double click on this to open it up. Bring it over here. You can see that this is an empty system. There's nothing happening here. There's no emitters. We only have our system overview here. First thing I want to do is I want to make an emitter. So let's right click and let's add an emitter. Let's add it in empty. And you can see there's still nothing happening in the preview window. It's because we haven't spawned anything yet. So in the emitter update, let's hit the plus sign and then do a search for spawn. The search will display the different ways that you can spawn a particle. In this case, I want to use a spawn rate, because this will spawn particles continuously. Let's click on that. And you can see there's still nothing happening here. The reason that is that we don't have any particles spawning. So let's make this 20. Now you can see we've got a little dot there. Now let's put that material that we were looking at on this. So let's go to Render. And you can see that this is set up with the default sprite material. Let's go into the timeline too. And if you click on this and type in smoke, do a search, and then click on the M smoke sub-UV. I'm going to zoom in here as close as I can. You can see now we've got our 8x8 frame sub-UV on here. So let's divide up this first. So let's go down to sub-UV, and we need to set this up with 8x8, so that now we have a single frame. And then click on sub-UV blending enabled. Now you can see this still isn't moving. We're going to do that in just a second, but not yet. So before I do that, I want to change a couple of things about this particle. And so I want to go into the Initialize Particle. You can see that here we've got a number of options. We've got our lifetime, we've got our mask, color bases, sprite size, things like that. So I'm going to turn off mask because I don't necessarily want to have smoke to have any mass. I want to change this lifetime to a uniform distribution. Because right now it's set up to 5 seconds, and I don't necessarily want it to last that long, and I want to give it a little bit of variation. To do that, click the down arrow in lifetime and search for uniform. You'll get a couple of options here. Now the one I want to use is uniform range float for a random distribution. We want to change this to as 2.5 seconds and 3 seconds. Just tap through that. And then for the color, I want to make this 0.2 in RGB, and then I want to leave the alpha at 1. Now for the sprite size, I'm using a basic camera facing sprite. Now if you go down to render, you can see facing mode is set to unaligned, which is what I want for something like this. For the smoke, I want to use a square sprite instead of a non-uniform sprite like you might use in a velocity-based emission. What I want to do is lock the entry to a single value instead of typing the same value 2 times. To do that, we need to change the sprite size to a float. So click the down arrow in Sprite Size and search for Vector. Select Vector 2D from Float, and this will give you a single value to change the sprite size uniformly. And I also want to make this a uniform distribution too, because I don't necessarily want it to be the sprite to spawn at the same size per frame. Once again, go to Uniform, Ranged Float, and then let's change this to 40 and 60. Now you can see that it's spawning in different sized emitters between 40 and 60. Next, I want to vary the sprite's rotation. When the sprite spawns, I want to have a random value drive the rotation. This will not spin the sprite over time. This is set up in degrees, so let's make this, again, a uniform float. And I'm going to do -360 and 360. So now you can see that the sprite is spinning, spawning in at different rotations. That's all I really want to do here. Next, I'm going to want to animate the sub-UV texture. Now to animate the sub-UV over time, I need to put the module in the particle update. Now if I want to have it pick a random frame, I'd put the module in the particle spawn. Let's go into particle update and let's hit the plus sign and hit sub-UV. What I want to click on is the sub-UV animation. Now what this is going to do is, this isn't doing anything right now, but it gives you a number of options. The first option is what animation mode you want. And like I said before, we clicked on the blending enabled. We want it to actually blend between frames. So this is actually set up as a linear blend. There's also a random blend, but we don't want that. We want to use linear for something that's animating over time. And we just need to put in the number of frames. In this case, it's 64. So now you can see that this is, well, you can kind of see that it's animating. Let's give it a little bit of motion so you can see it a little better. Let's hit gravity. And you can see that this breaks. Now you can either fix the issue, or you can move gravity above this force, and it will start to solve normally and not give you an error. And we don't necessarily want this to have regular gravity, which is -980. I want to give this a 60. You can see now this is moving up, and also 12 to give it a little bit of drift. Next thing I'm going to want to do is I want to change this color, because right now you can see that this is clipping out. So if you were to click on this plus sign here and do color, search for color. Now you can either do color or scale color. So let's do scale color. I'm going to move this up here. And what this is going to do is this is going to take whatever color is being used in your particle spawn, and it's going to scale it one way or another based on what you do in these settings here. I don't necessarily want to change the actual color, but I do want to change the alpha. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to, right now this is set to 1. Now if I say 0.5, you can see that this is a lot more faded. What I want to do is I want to change this over the course of the lifetime of the particle with a curve. So let's do this drop down here, click on it, and then hit curve. And because this is a float, it's going to give you the float from curve. Let's click on that. And now we've got a curve. What I want to do is I just want to do something pretty basic. I just want to use this as is mainly, but instead of it being a linear curve, I want it to be just like an auto curve. So what I do is you click on this, shift and click on the closing point, and then right click on a point, and then hit auto, and now we've got a nice smooth curve. You can make this window as big or as small as you need. So now we've got a nice curve. Starting, it's snapping in, which is fine. I don't necessarily need to change that because this space is going to get covered by fire. And then it's blending into a 0 range here. Get the numbers there. Next, I want to scale the size of the sprite over time. Let's make this a little bigger. Okay. Click on the Add Module button in the Particle Update and search for size. Now there's a number of options here. Scale sprite size is what we want. And right now there's again, the X and Y factor. I don't necessarily need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this into the X value again. So I'm going to hit this drop down. I'm going to type in vector. And I'm going to do vector 2D from float again. So now I've got a single value. So if I make this like 50, it's going to, oh, sorry, not 50. If I make it 5, it's going to make it a lot larger in X and Y instead of just doing it separately. And the reason I'm doing that is because when I change this into a curve, float from curve, it's easier for me to change these values, whereas normally I'd get like an X and a Y value for this. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to click on this point here. I'm going to make this value 1, which is what it's set to right now. And then I'm going to click on this other one, this other point, the end point, time it 1. I'm going to make it 3. I'm going to click this zoom in to fit vertical and horizontal. Right click and make this an auto curve again. So now you can see it starts at 1 and it slowly gets a little bigger, gets 3 times larger over the course of the lifetime of the particle. The last thing that I want to do here is I'm going to add in a little bit of rotation rate on this. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit the particle update, I'm going to hit rotation, rate, click on sprite rotation rate, and nothing's really happening here. So what I want to do is and I just want to give it a regular rotation. So let's see, I'm going to make this 30. Now you can see that it's slowly rotating as it's drifting up. That's all I really wanted to do with this smoke here. Oh, I forgot to do this. Lastly, I want to let's name this emitter so that we can keep track of what's what. So let's name this E smoke base. Now that we can see what we're doing, let's go to spawn rate, drop this down to like 3. So we got a nice little light smoke there. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to put in the fire. So let's go back into the P fire. Let's go into flames. Let's see where we're at. Fire sub UV. Let's take a look at this material. Let's see how many. This is a 6x6 sub UV, so 6 columns and 6 rows. Good to know. Click on that spyglass again. Oops. Let's go over here. Open this up. Let's see what this is doing. This material. So, got some dynamic parameters that are adding to these UVs, and then here it looks like we have an add to the power exponent. So that'll be fun to mess with. Let's see what else. And we've got the particle color, so we can change the color and change the dynamic parameter. So that's good. So it's good to know. Let's close this. Let's go back into the effects fire. So let's right click and add another empty emitter. And let's name this at the very beginning instead of at the very end like last time. So let's do E fire base. And again, we don't have anything emitting yet, so let's add in a spawn rate. And let's make this something like 5. So now you can see we've got our dot again. Let's change that out. Let's go down to render and let's do a search for fire in the material. Click on the fiber sub-UV. Let's isolate this. Right click, isolate. Look at the other one in just a second. You can see we've got our 6x6 in there. Go down to your render, and then in your sub-UV do 6 and 6. So now we've got a single frame. Now, unlike last time, I walked through all of this particle update. Let's get this animating immediately. So let's go into the particle update, click on it and hit sub-UV. And it's solving. Let's just, oops, I got the wrong one there. Let's delete that. Delete it. Do sub-UV. And click on the sub-UV animation and not the sub-UV texture sample. Move this up. And we're going to make it's linear, and then let's make this 36, because 6 times 6 is 36. And now we've got an animating sprite. Cool. Now go up to the Initialize Particle. Oh, before we do that, let's go back down into render. And I want to make sure that this is not going to be a square particle. We're going to use velocity base. So let's go to velocity aligned. So we're going to need to have the X and Y in all of our scales. So that'll be good. So let's go into Initialize Particle, and we're going to be doing a few things here similar to what we did last time. So in the lifetime, let's drop this down. And again, I want to have a range of life for each particle, similar to what we did with the smoke. So let's do uniform and do uniform range float. And we're going to make this 0.7 and 1. Turn off mass. And in the color, we're going to want to, you can see it's moving now. In the color, we're going to want to make it 20. So it's really bright, 5 and 0.5. Let's make it 0.8. There you go. And for the sprite size, I'm going to also want it to be in a uniform range. So, because I don't want it to necessarily be the same sprite every time it spawns. Now, because this is a velocity based, we can use X and Y value. The Y is what's going to be pointed up, and the X is going to be the width. So the X, I'm going to make it 40 and 60 in my minimum. Then in my maximum, I'm going to do 60 and 90. Oops. 60 and 90. There you go. Let's back up a little bit. Now you can see we've got a little stretched particle. From here, I'm going to add in a few things to the initial spawn and the particle spawn. First thing I want to do is I want to add in a location. So let's do location. Actually, let's just type in what kind of location. We're going to do a sphere location. And what this is going to do is it's going to spawn the particles in a sphere range. And so what I want to do is, this is set to 100. I want to drop it to 30. Don't need to do any sort of offsets, but I don't necessarily need it to be in a full sphere. In the distribution, you can change how the sprites spawn on the sphere location. You have a sphere distribution dropdown, and you can also toggle different hemispheres. Now in this case, we want the sprite to only spawn on the top of the sphere. So click on the Hemisphere Z toggle. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is I want to add in a couple of different velocities. In Cascade, you could have added in a velocity in the sphere location, but they've separated out in this, so that's actually really good. So let's add in a velocity from point. What this is going to do is it's saying from a point from a 0, 0, 0 point, which is what this origin offset is, push out. So I don't need it to be at 100. So let's make it 10. And now you can see it's being pushed in different directions, which is a great start. But I want to add in a little bit more velocity to this. What I want to do is I'm going to add in another velocity. And add a velocity. And what I want to do now is I want to, again, do a uniformed range on this because I don't want it to always be pushing the particles in the same direction at the same rate. Now I'm already getting some variation with the point, but I want to add in a little bit more variation. So I'm going to do uniform ranged vector. And what I want to do is I'm going to say in my minimum, I'm going to give it 8. I don't necessarily need it to be moving in Y. And then 35 in Z. And then I also want to give it 15 and 60. So it's being pushed up and it's moving in the same direction as our smoke. Let's turn the isolation off to verify how the two emitters are looking together. The fire and the smoke are moving in the same general direction and the motion makes sense. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's isolate this again. Now from here, we're going to look at those dynamic parameters a bit. And in Cascade, the way that you set up dynamic parameters was you would put in your dynamic parameter and then you'd click whether or not you would have it select a range of values or a value at spawn, or you put it on a curve. In Niagara, dynamic parameters work generally the same, but you need to put the module in the correct group. So if you need the dynamic parameter to change over the lifetime of the particle, you'd add the module to the particle update. Whereas if you want the dynamic parameter to apply values only at spawn, you'd put the module in the particle spawn. In this case, we need to put the module in the particle spawn group, because both of those parameters are basically saying, hey, pick me a value at spawn time. So hit the plus button again and type in dynamic, or dynam, and it'll come up right there. And the nice thing is that this, if your material has dynamic parameters set up in it, it'll come in automatically, which is really nice. In Cascade, you would need to do a right-click refresh, and so this is just coming in automatically, which is a nice little bit. So the first thing is we're going to use this fire mask offset. We're going to do uniform parameter, uniform range float. And what I want to do is a 0 to 1 range. That's all I really need to do for that. And we can turn off the parameter. And then the exponent, the power exponent, I'm going to do another uniform range float. And uniform range float. What I want to do for that is I want to give it either no exponent or a larger exponent. So let's see if we can see what this is going to do. So right now it's 0 to 1. Let's make it something like 10. You can see it's got a little bit more crunchy noise in it. So let's do 6. 6.5. So it's either picking nothing or it's picking a power of 6.5, about 3. That was 6.5. Okay. So now I've got those set up. So now I want to do a little bit of changes, some changes in the particle update. So the first thing, we've already got the sub-UV animation in there, which is great. And so what I want to do is I want to add in a scale. So let's do this. Let's do scale, sprite, scale size. Click on in size, scale sprite size. Move this above foresolve. And what I want to do is I want to turn this into a curve. So let's hit the drop down in scale factor and then type in curve. And then click vector 2D from curve. And now this is going to give you a slightly different version of the curve editor. If you shift left click drag, you can select both points. And what I want to do is I want to say at time 0, make this 0. Oops. Time 0, 0. And then for my first curve I'm selecting should be my Y curve. Let's see if it actually works. And then at time 1, at the end of the normalized time, oh, it was my X. So at 1, okay, so I've selected my X curve. So at time 1, make this 1. And then when I select my Y curve, I do 1.5. So it goes a little bit bigger. That's a little too big, actually. Let's make this 1.25. And of course, I want to make this an auto curve, so I have nice ease in and out. Now, since we're here, I can also mention that if I wanted to know actually what I selected properly, I could turn off my X and my Y curve individually and then do my point selections and make my changes that way. I was trying to do a little shortcut there. So let's take a look at this with the smoke. So let's turn off the isolation. And it seems like it's moving up a little fast. So what I want to do is I'm going to add in a drag force to slow it down a bit as it moves up. Let's do fix issue. So now this is set to 1. It doesn't look like this is moving barely at all. So let's drop it down to 0.2. Now these little fire bits are actually going to be my parts of the fire that are going to be kind of moving through. And then the next emitter is going to be a core emitter. Before we move on, I wanted to change a couple things. So let's go into the Initialize Particle in the Firebase. And I want to change the color and the size a little bit. So let's make this 25 and then 8 and 0.8. And then I want to change the minimum of the sprite size to 55 because it's stretching a little too much. Let's make that 10, 30. Shut it down to 8 again. Okay. Now from here I want to make a core, a version of this fire that's just going to sit at the base. So to do that, I'm not going to make an empty emitter. What I am going to do though is I'm going to right click and I'm going to make this into a parent emitter. So this will become an instance. So let's create an asset from this. And let's call this Firebase core. And hit save. Niagara will open a parent emitter in the new window to confirm the save. And now the eFirebase emitter in the FX Fire system is now an instance. So what I want to do now is I want to right click and I want to add an emitter. I'm going to look for Firebase core. And then now we've got 2 of these fire emitters in here. Now you can see this is doing exactly the same thing. So I'm going to do a handful of changes in here. But because it's an instance, it'll be cheaper. So instead of having 2 emitters that are doing completely different things, I'm going to use this as my base and then make a few changes in here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change my spawn rate. This is at 5. I want to change this to 8. I'm also going to isolate this. So let's isolate that real fast. And then in my Initialize Particle, I need to do a couple things. But before I do that, I need to go down to my render. I don't need this to be a velocity-based emitter anymore. So let's change this unaligned. So now this is a regular sprite, a square sprite. So going back into my Initialize Particle, I'm going to change the lifetime to something a little bit lower. So let's do 0.4 and 0.9. So now it's going to be a little bit of a faster emitter. I'm going to leave the color the same. And as far as the sprite size, I don't need it to have a range of X and Y anymore. I'm going to go into here, I'm going to type in vector. And what that's going to do is I'm going to, again, make this locked into the X value. So the X and Y will be the same. So what I need to do is I'm going to make this 50 so I can see something. And then I'm going to also make this a uniform ranged float. Make this 50 and 60. And then I'm going to do a uniform ranged float in my sprite rotation. And I'm going to do negative 360 in my minimum and 360 in my max. It's a little wide though, so in my sphere location, I'm going to drop this down to 10. So it's got a little bit more of a core. I don't necessarily need my velocity from point anymore, so I'm going to turn that off. And in my velocity itself, I don't necessarily need it to be doing much of anything, but I am going to keep a little bit of this in there. So I'm going to make 4, and then 15, and then 8, and 30. Dynamic parameters are going to be the same. And then my scale, I'm going to change this out again. So if I go into the vector 2D from curve, I'm going to lock the vector again. Make this a float, and then curve, float from curve. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this 1, and this I'm going to make this 4. Which is probably too big. So I'm going to make this curve, auto curve. I'm just going to see what it looks like unisolated. Yeah, that's way too big. I'm going to fix that. So in my second point, I'm going to drop this down to 3.5. Let's do 1.5. Okay. So now I've got a core emitter as well as some little licks there. Now the one thing I want to add in here too is I want to add in some lights. So what I want to do is I'm going to go down to the renderer and I'm going to add a new renderer. And you get a handful of options here. This is your light, your mesh, your ribbon, or your sprite. I'm going to add in a light. And you can see you can't really see much there. I'm going to do two things. Before I start messing with this light render, I'm going to go to the preview scene settings, and I'm going to show my floor. And that'll show a little bit of a bounce light on this. In my light renderer, go back to my selection. I am going to make sure it affects translucency, which makes it a little more expensive. And we gave it a 5 radius scale. And if I turn off my inverse, you see that this is enormous. So I'm going to just leave it at 5 for now, because you can see a little bit of light happening down there. But it's not, actually you can't see any light because I haven't even added in any color yet. So let's see. Right now it's at 0, so I'm going to do 100 in X, Y, and Z. So now you can see something happening there. But I don't want it to be white, so I'm going to say 200, 100, 10. And that'll give it a little bit of light range there. I wonder if I made this 20. No, I'll just do 10. That's pretty much all I wanted to do with this one. Just wanted to give you an instance as well as add in a little bit of a light. In working on the fire, I realized I forgot to do something. It's going to be great because I've already instanced this out. So let's go into the Firebase core instance, and let's go into the particle update. What I want to do is I want to add in a little bit. I forgot to add in an alpha value for this because now it's just snapping in and out. Let's go to particle update and add a scale color. And I don't want to scale the RGB, but I do want to scale the alpha. So let's go into the drop down and do curve, float from curve. And you'll see that it's slowly blending out. And this is not what I want this to do. So what I want to do is I want to add in another point here. I want to make this point 0, so a value of times 0, a value of 0. So when it spawns, I want to have 0 opacity. And when I hit, say, 0.3, I want this to be at 1. Now that's not very exciting, so let's start changing some values here. Let's make it 2. I'm starting getting a little bit more bright there. Let's do 3. What's 3 do? And I'm getting a little bit more heat in there, so I'm going to open this up a little bit. I'm also going to select all these points and then make them auto curve. So 1 versus 5. I'm going to leave it at 5. Okay. Now that I've made my change here, I'm going to put these side by side so you can see the change in the system when I apply it. So when I've compiled it, it still hasn't updated this emitter, but when I hit apply, you can see that the scale color was added to both of the emitters. So that's really cool. Okay, so I'm going to save this, close it, and go back to the fire emitter. So now that we've got a little bit more of a beefy fire versus what it was looking like before. All right, next we're going to add in some embers in here. So I'm going to use the GPU emitter for that. So let's right click and add an empty emitter. Let's name this Embers. And in the emitter settings, I'm going to change this to a GPU compute sim. And it's going to grief me for a little bit about, I don't have a bounding box yet, and I'm not going to actually add it in until later. So I'm just going to run this as normal. I'll add in fixed bounds after I'm done building the emitter, but for now, I'll be getting this warning. So the first thing I want to do is, again, I need to add in a spawn. Let's do spawn rate in the emitter update. I'm just going to add in 30 for now. And in my Initialize Particle, again, I'm going to change my lifetime range. So let's do this as a uniform, range float. And I'm going to do a 1 to 2 second emitter. Remove my mask. I'm going to turn off color because I'm going to change the color over time on this one in the particle update. For the sprite size, again, I'm going to do the vector because I know this is a regular square sprite. Vector 2D from float. I'm going to do uniform, range float, and it's going to be 2.5 and 3. Still haven't really seen much yet. I'll eventually get the right material on this, but I want to get it kind of moving first before I put the material on it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a sphere location. Type in sphere location, and I'm going to make this 20. And I'm going to only have it spawn in the hemisphere top. Let's isolate this. Now you can see we've got 30 sprites spawning at the top of the sphere location. Now at this point, I will put in the material. Let's see, what was that called? Let's move this up. And let's go into our starter content, particles, fire. And the embers, let's see what that embers is doing. Embers. Radial gradient, close this. Now the radial gradient doesn't use a texture. It just has the radial gradient and up by power 4. So it just looks like this. So let's get that on there. Let's close that. So let's see, type in radial gradient. So now we've got this radial gradient in here. And let's see, let's move this over a bit. All right, so now we've got our emitter spawning on top of the sphere location, and we need to do some things to this. So let's start with color. Let's add a color. Now we're not going to do a scale color because we've turned off color in the initial color, because we are going to change this over life. First thing I want to do is let's do a couple things. Let's add in a curve, color from curve, and if you click here, you're going to get a color picker. Now let's do 40, 10, and 5. So we got a nice glowy particle there. Now here, if you click on the bottom, you're going to get your opacity. Let's make this 1. For the color, let's just make this just 100% red. But then let's move this up a bit. So if you look at the color of this over life, you can see that it's actually changing color. So it's coming a bit too red there. So let's like bring this down to about there. What's this at? This is at 0.87. And then the next thing I need to do is we need to add in some alpha. So let's do this. Let's make a curve here in the scale alpha. We're going to do a float from curve. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it like this and give it an auto curve. Let's move this in a little bit. I want to see the red come in sooner, a little sooner now that I see it. A little bit more red in there. So let's drop the blue out of this because it's washing out the color a bit. You want a little bit more yellow in there. Okay. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to mess with the gravity. So let's add in some gravity force. And we're going to fix that issue. That's okay on that. And I don't want it to fall into the world. I want it to move up. So let's do 200. So now this is moving up, and that's neat, but it's not really that exciting yet. Let's move this color up here. Let's add in a little bit of curl noise. So let's do particle update. Let's curl noise force. And we want to do a couple things here. Nope, we need to fix this issue though. Let's give it a little more strength as it's really not moving in the way that I like right now. So let's do 250. And now it's moving a little bit. Let's see, let's look at it all together. Those embers are moving a bit fast. Let's add in a drag. So let's do particle update, drag, and fix the issue. And right now it's at 1. Let's see what it looks like at 2. All right. Let's take a look at the overdraw. So let's go down into the view mode, shader complexity. The smoke sprites are a bit larger than what's being displayed, and we're still paying for all of that invisible overdraw, so this is a good candidate for a cutout. Now the cutout feature will trim out a sprite based on a texture channel. So let's go back into, actually let's go into wireframe. And let's go into the smoke-based render. And then you saw that we use the smoke sub-UV there, so let's go down here and do smoke sub-UV texture. And now you can see that the texture has changed that quad into an 8 vertice poly. And we go back into the view modes, You can see that there's less of that poly being drawn. That's useful. Next, let's work on this Firebase. Let's go to Render. And this is an opportunity to use the instance. Let's click on the instance. And in here, go to the Render, go down to the Cutout texture and hit Fire. Because it's using the Fire sub-UV. Now I don't believe this has an alpha, so let's make it a red channel. And if we go to the shader complexity, you can see that it's working. And apply and compile and save. Now if we go in here, you can see that it's updated in the Fire sub-UV, but it is not updated here. So I wonder if it's because I have changed this. So let's do this. Let's make this unaligned again. And now the Fire sub-UV is there. Yeah, I made a change to this up here, so it probably didn't update it there. So now we've got all of the fires working, and the embers don't have a texture, and they're really tiny, so it doesn't. That one's not that bad. Let's go back into Lit to see if the cutouts are trimming into any of the textures, and they're not, so it's good. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have our bounds set up correctly, because this is still griefing me. So let's go up into Bounds and click Set Fixed Bounds. No, there it is. So now this one's fine. So now we've got our bounds in there, and we're good to go. Now that we have a system built, let's take a look at it in the level. From here, we can assess it and make changes if we need to. So with the in Content Effects Fire, let's pull it into the level, and you can see that it's kind of doing what it needs to do. Now I'm looking at it in the level. There's a couple things that I might want to do to this. System. Let's go into the Initialize Particle in the core. I want to make this a little smaller. What's this 40 and 50 look like? That's a little better. Still pretty active. It's doing what it needs to do. I'm going to do 45, 55. All right, and that's the last change I'm going to do for this one. So this is pretty much what I wanted to do when I was building the emitter. As an idea, let's take this one step further. Let's say I wanted to add parameters to this, and as well as into Blueprint. So let's save this and close it. And I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call this emitter, sorry, this system Fire Params. And I know that I could make an instance of this, but I'm just going to do this for now. So let's open this one up. Well, we need to determine what we want to do to this emitter. So what I want to do is I want to be able to change the fire, all the fire colors, as well as, and the ember colors, as well as the smoke color. So it's pretty easy to do. So if we were to go into for the Initialize Particle, you got this color here. Now we can, right now it's set to 0.2. And let's say we want to make this into a parameter. It's pretty easy to do. So it's click on the drop down and add and type in parameter. And what we need to do is we need to read from a new user parameter. And what this will do is it'll turn this white, because this is set to white. And I've got this user color. If I drop down this user, you can see that this user color is now up here. Now I can double click on it, or sorry, let's right click, rename it. Let's call this smoke color. So now we've got a smoke color parameter, as well as a color parameter. Now the color parameter is being referenced here in the smoke emitter. Let's drag and drop this into here, because this is the name I'm going to want to use in Blueprint when I want to change this color. Let's do that with the Firebase too. Let's go into the Initialize Particle, color, do the same thing. Parameter, new user parameter, color. Let's go up here, let's rename this to fire color. And let's drag and drop it into both of these user colors. Go Initialize Particle, drag and drop. Oh, I need to make this a parameter. Let's pull that in there. Now, we can't necessarily do that for here. And I'm going to go and do how to do this in a little bit. But let's go back into the initialized particles and the user particles. So now we've got this. Now we've got these two. We've got the smoke color here. We've got the fire color here and here. So how can we use this in a blueprint? I'm going to pull this over here. I'm going to right-click, and then I'm going to make a new blueprint class. Call it an actor, and I'm going to call this BP underscore fire params. And I'm going to open this up. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a Niagara particle system. Add in the FX fire params. So what do we want to do? So what we want to do is I want to say, when I use this version of the BP fire params, I want to be able to change this color to whatever I want, both the smoke and the fire. So let's set that up. So go into the construction script and then put in set color parameter Niagara. And the param, I'm going to expose this. I'm going to promote this to a variable. I'm going to call this smoke color. And the parameter name is smoke color. So in smoke color, we need to do a couple things. We need to make it editable. We need to expose it on spawn. And you can add in more stuff too. I could do a tooltip and just say smoke color. Let's save and compile this. So now, when we go into the smoke color, you can see we've got options. So let's make this something ridiculous. Let's make it red. And to see it, we need to make the alpha 100%. So 1. And now we've got red smoke here. And because it's in the initial, because this parameter is set up for the smoke and the initialized particle, it's going to use all the scaling inside of it. Let's do this with the fire too. Let's just copy this, copy paste, and then let's expose this parameter. Let's call this one fire color. And let's set those up again, fire color, and expose on spawn. And instead it's called fire color. Let's connect that together. Save and compile. And you can see we've got the fire color exposed. Now let's see, what color do we want this to make this? Let's do 1. Now black fire is cool, but not necessarily what we're looking for. So let's do 10.5.5. Or let's pick something in here. So let's see. So you could have pink fire or something else. So let's do 10, let's do 5, and let's do 50. Let's do 500. Roar. So you get the idea. And then you could change this to whatever color you want. So let's say you want to add blue fire and blue smoke. You get the idea. So now you notice that the embers don't really work yet, and that is a little trickier. So let's look at that next. Now we've got the colors in here. Let's take a look at getting some color, the correct colors through the blueprint on the Embers. So let's go back into Niagara and let's isolate the Embers. You can see this is driven through this color and it's using the normalized age. So what we want to do is I want to make a module that says, based on the normalized age, blend from here to here, but make it so that I can expose it into Blueprint. So let's go into Scratchpad. Let's go into Modules and click on this plus sign. You can see here, it gives you a little set of nodes here, and it gives you a get and a set. So over here, I'm going to be getting some information, and then I'm going to set it back into the particle color. First thing I want to get is the normalized age of this particle. So let's hit this little plus sign here, and then do a search for norm, and click on normalized age. This is one entry. We're going to use this in a little bit. Next thing I want to do is I want to do a color input, because I want to get the start color and then the end color. So new linear color. I'm going to change this name to start ember color. And then I'm going to do another input, color input. I'm going to call this end ember color. Next, we're going to do a lerp, linear interpolate. A is the start, B is the end, and then we're going to use the normalized age to drive this color range. And then from here, I'm like, okay, I've got this range set up. Now, what do I want to do? I want to set it to the actual particle color. So I'm going to hit the plus sign here and hit color and do particles color. Get into that. And then now, that's set up to the output. Now from here, I can do two things. I can apply it, or I can right click and create an asset. So I'm going to create a new asset. I'm going to call this Niagara module, and it's going to be a horrible name. It's going to be Ember lerp color. Okay, now we've opened it up here. Now to expose this to actual Niagara, I need to do a couple things. First thing I need to do is I need to expose it to the library. I'm going to add in a description, just ember lerp colors. And then for my highlight, I want to call this color. I'm going to drop down color, and then compile it and apply it. So now we've got a new we just basically made a very simple new module. So now we go into the emitter, and here, if I do ember, I have nm ember lerp color. So now we've got a new way to color these embers. As you can see, this is now made these white. So let's turn this off. And now I want to put in a start color. And that other color from before was 40, 10, and 5. And then my alpha would be 1. Actually, I think it was 0.5. Yep. And then for my end color, it's going to be 1, 0, 0, and then my alpha is going to be 0. So you can see it's changing, slowly changing over the course of that. See that as it gets towards the end of its lifetime, it goes to red. If I want to make this really obvious, I'll make it something like, I don't know, 0, 0 to 100. You can see it's going to blue over the course of the lifetime. So let's make this 1, 0, and 0 again, so it's red. Hit OK. And as I said, it's at 0, so you're not really going to see anything there. So that's cool. Now we've got this range working. So if we unisolate it, you can see that it's in there. It doesn't really help much in this case, but if you go back into this Ember lerp color, now we can change these into actual parameter names. So let's go down and do parameter, read from new user parameter. So now we've got end Ember color. Now let's do parameter. And we've got start Ember color. Now we can actually use these in Blueprint. Let's go back into Blueprint. And let's do the same thing. Copy this. And connect it up. Let's do a promote new variable. We're going to call this Ember start color. Same thing with the exposing the instance editable as well as expose on spawn. And the name was start Ember color. Start Ember color. Copy this, paste it, and this is going to be end Ember color. And then I'm going to delete this and make this a promote to variable. Ember and color. Editable and expose on spawn. Compile. And then save it. Save this as well as this. And then I'm going to go back into my level. Select this, and now we've got new Ember colors. And the start color, I'm going to say blue. Let's see, 200. And I also need to make sure the alpha is set. So now we've got a blue. Let's do this. Let's make this like this. Kind of a white blue. And then for the end, I'm going to leave it, it's going to make it blue as normal. And leave the alpha at 0 so that it can actually blend out. So now you've got, in this blueprint, now you can change this as much as you want. So let's do one more change to it and then I'll call it. So let's duplicate this out. So now there's 2 of these. I'm going to change this one. So let's make the smoke color orange. And then let's make the fire color orange. Let's make the start Ember orange. And then the end color. Let's see, Sprite red. A red color. And obviously you don't need to make the smoke orange, you could make it white or black. Oops. Deselect it there, or you can make it black. G. And there you have it. And it, because of the way that the colors were set up in that emitter, it's automatically changing the light color too. Added bonus. This concludes the Introduction to Niagara series. Over the course of the videos, we took a look at the Niagara interface and built a system in Niagara with multiple emitters. We also took a look at how to hook up colors in Blueprint and created a simple Niagara module from scratch. I plan to do more of these Niagara videos in the future, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching.